Have you ever heard of the rice borrower? On my grandma's birthday, a man came to borrow 7 grains of rice with a bucket. My uncle cursed him and drove him away. But my grandma counted 7 grains of rice and chased him out, but he never came back. No one was alive, and no body was found. My uncle cried and said that the rice borrower had borrowed my grandma's life. The family searched for 3 days. On the first day, my aunt broke her leg and my third uncle broke his head. On the second day, my mother burned her hand while cooking. Lupo in the village said that my grandma was not in the world, but she could not be buried, so we, the younger generations, would be tossed. My uncle was scared and asked Lupo to help find the body. Lupo lived at the end of the village and was the person I was most afraid of when I was 9 years old. Because everyone said that she was a living dead and talked to ghosts and gods. Her most powerful thing was, she could find people when she was alive and find corpses when she was dead. Lupo took the headscarf that my grandma often used, and after a while of chanting, she shouted loudly, "Get up, Tilda!" Then the headscarf fluttered and fell on the rice jar at home. I knew that it was the man who borrowed rice who killed my mother. Uncle was so excited that he threw himself on the rice jar. Lupo's expression remained unchanged. But I always felt that the look she gave Uncle was a little strange. Borrowing rice is equivalent to borrowing life. You said your mother chased out with 7 grains of rice? Uncle nodded with red eyes. Dowazi was there too, and she saw it too. Lupo looked at me hiding by the door. Dowazi, what does that man look like? Everyone present looked at me, and I swallowed and stuttered. I was playing with glass beads at the door, and I didn't see what that man looked like. It's just that he was always dripping with water, and there was a smell of rotten fish. I frowned, and the smell seemed to linger in my nose again. Lupo lowered her head, pinched and calculated, and muttered, "Water, rotten fish smell." Then she ran towards the pond at the entrance of the village. Everyone reacted, and Lupo was afraid that she had calculated the position of Grandma. Grandma Lu stopped by the pond at the entrance of the village. "Let's go find a corpse collector, it's in this water." The pond is not deep, but it is connected to the big river outside the village. The villagers don't let their children play here, and the pond is covered with moss. We found 2 corpse collectors in the town, but they didn't dare to go into the water. They said that the pond in Chintang village was evil. They were not good enough, so they asked our family to rent a machine to pump water in the town. "Go, your mother is standing in the pond with her eyes open. Your family will not have peace until she comes out of this water." In the evening, my uncle gathered everyone together. "Everyone knows the situation. Find someone to block the water inlet of the pond, plus rent a machine to pump water. It will cost more than 2,000 yuan to retrieve the body, and the money will have to be collected by the 3 families." My aunt limped. "Damn old woman! You can't rest in peace even after death! I have no money. I am a bachelor, and my mother usually helps me. How can I have money?" The third uncle had a bandage on his head, and his nonchalant look made the eldest uncle suddenly angry. "That's our mother, how can you be so heartless?" The youngest aunt said with red eyes, "What conscience? Anyway, we have all suffered from the disaster, and only you and the eldest brother are fine. You are afraid that you too will pay." The third uncle looked at the eldest uncle with a squint, and quarreled with the youngest aunt, and then left unhappily. I couldn't sleep well at night, and I always felt that there was a smell of stinky fish in the house. It seemed that water was dripping on my face, and I shrank my head and dared not open my eyes. Dua, wake up, your uncle is in trouble, let's go too." I was woken up by my mother. It was still dark, and the smell of stinky fish at the tip of my nose became stronger. "Mom, I smelled the stinky fish on the person who borrowed rice that day. Did you have a nightmare? Get up quickly, your uncle is not doing well," and Lupo asked us to go. My mother didn't pay attention to what I said, and quickly found my shoes for me. Uncle is dead, head first in the rice jar at Grandma's house. But I remember that there was not much rice in the rice jar. I peeked through the gap between the adults, and the rice jar was full of blood, and the bright red rice grains filled Uncle's head. My aunt had fainted, my aunt was leaning against the wall and vomiting, and my third uncle was squatting at the door smoking. "Rice is life, your mother probably wants to come back. Standing on the corpse is evil, nailing the corpse into the door, quickly take the corpse out." Nailing the corpse for 7 days, the whole family will die. Lupo said that Grandma's evil spirit will become heavier day by day. Before, it only hurt the family members, but now it can kill Uncle. My third uncle said with a pale face, "I will go to the town to rent a machine at dawn." My aunt and my younger aunt also recovered and replied, "Let's pool money together to rent more machines, drain the water before noon, or someone will die tonight. I'll prepare something first." After saying that, Granny Lou went back. Just like that, it was the 5th day since Grandma disappeared. She slowly appeared amid the roar of the machine. The water was slowly pumped to the big river next to her, but Grandma stood motionless in the middle of the pond. She was still wearing the new clothes she bought for her birthday. The corpse collector came forward and lit incense to attract the corpse. But in this scorching summer, she couldn't light the corpse attracting incense even after changing several lighters. Granny Lou stood by the pond, her expression becoming more and more serious. "Duwazi, did you really see the rice borrower?" I was stunned for a moment, and nodded heavily. "I saw it, carrying a bucket." Granny Lou sighed, "What's in the bucket?" "There are snails." I blurted it out and was stunned again. How do I know there are snails? But Granny Lou didn't ask any more questions. Because the corpse collector invited his own master to come out of the mountain, and finally brought Grandma's body to the shore. I looked around the corpse's feet out of curiosity, but I didn't see any nails. Why did Lupo say that Grandma was nailed to the bottom of the pond? Under the command of Lupo, everyone put Grandma's body into the prepared coffin. Uncle's coffin was also parked in the yard, and the two coffins were placed side by side in a dark color. According to Lupo's request, my aunt tied a mouse, 2 rabbits, 3 roosters, and 4 black dogs to the coffin. Some brave people in the village gathered at the gate of the yard to watch, and I stood in the corner of the yard with my mother behind me. Lupo cut the necks of the mice, rabbits, etc. prepared by my aunt to bleed. The mixed blood was smeared on the outside of Grandma's coffin by Lupo. Lupo muttered something, and I only heard a few sporadic sentences: 1 mouse goes, 2 rabbits die, 3 roosters crow, and 4 dogs bark. Finally, Lupo nailed the animal corpses to Grandma's coffin with long nails smeared with blood. Again and again, Granny Lou nails with great effort. I felt that the clanging sound was like in my ears, which made me feel a little uncomfortable, and I shook my head. My mother reached out and touched my head and asked me, "Dua, what's wrong?" Lying in my mother's arms, I shook my head. Granny Lou also began to let the cousin of my uncle's family hold rice and sprinkle it into my uncle's coffin. People in the village said that this jar of rice was my uncle's life, and my uncle was borrowed by the ghost of my grandmother. Done! Bury tonight! Bury the eldest brother next to your mother. Granny Lou was sweating all over her head, and seemed to have spent a lot of effort. "Granny Lou, my husband died so tragically, why do we have to bury him at night? What if it affects my son's future fortune?" My aunt was a little dissatisfied. "Because our funerals and burials are all carried out after the cock crows in the early morning." Granny Lou sneered, "Fortune? Let's talk about it when you can live." The younger aunt was pale and didn't say anything. Uncle San looked at the villagers who were watching with a gloomy face. "Lupo, can you tell who is behind my mother's incident? There are a bunch of snail shells under your mother's feet, and the person who is carrying a bucket of rice is probably not a human." Lupo sighed, as if she thought of something, and shook her head again. "The person who borrowed rice." My aunt turned to look at me and said, "Only my eldest brother and Dowa have seen the person who borrowed rice." My mother stopped me and said, "Dowa didn't see the man's face clearly." Even though my aunt was dissatisfied, she still prepared for the burial according to Lupo's arrangement. Grandma died suddenly and made a fuss, and my uncle died tragically in the rice jar. Uncle San spent some money to find someone to carry the coffin. But when Lupo calculated the time, 12 strong men couldn't lift Grandma's coffin. Lupo went forward to check, and when the light swept over, she saw that the coffin was slowly leaking water, and the yard was filled with a strong smell of stinky fish. Lupo's face changed drastically, and she hurried to the pond at the entrance of the village. Even though they didn't know what was going on, everyone saw that something serious had happened, and they all ran towards the pond. On a summer night, the cicadas chirping in the moonlight made the pond surrounded by the shade of trees less terrifying. When they saw the middle of the pond, everyone retreated in panic. The water surface of the pond that had been pumped during the day only reached the calves of adults. Under the cold moonlight, the grandmother who should have been in the coffin stood in the pond with her eyes open, motionless. Lupo was obviously also frightened, and she took a few steps back before she could stabilize her body. "It's a disaster! It's a disaster!" Uncle San seemed to be furious, holding a machete and walking towards Grandma in the water. "Damn it! I'm going all out! I'll chop you up and see how you kill me!" Lupo tried to stop him, but Uncle San just turned his head and took a look, and his bright red eyes scared us. But when Uncle San approached Grandma, his speed slowed down strangely and he threw away the knife. Then, before we could react, he put his head into the water at Grandma's feet. "Please save my brother, Granny Lu, please save him?" The young ant asked for help from the people around her and shook Granny Lu's arm. "Brother San, look up, look up!" But no one dared to go over, and everyone watched Uncle San drowning headfirst in the pond that was less than calf height. During the whole process, Uncle San did not struggle. No one spoke beside the pond except for the sobbing of the young ant. Granny Lu's face was solemn. "Let's deal with it in the daytime, there are still 2 days, you all should be careful." The eldest ant looked at the pond, her face pale. After my cousin called her several times, she came back to her senses. "Why do I think your third uncle seems to have stood up?" The youngest ant trembled and leaned against the tree. "Yes, the third brother has stood up." The people who carried the coffin had already left, and our family and Lupo were by the pond. My cousin shone a flashlight on the water surface, and the body of the third uncle next to my grandmother was standing there with his head down. The youngest ant's voice trembled. "Next, is it my turn? Is the second child in your family dead or alive?" In the moonlight, Lupo's face was a little scary. The last time I asked the eldest child, he said that the second child had a quarrel with his wife and ran away from home for 7 years. My mother held my hand tightly and asked my mother in a low voice, "Is my father still alive?" Mom didn't say anything. The youngest ant cried first. "The second brother must be dead, he died 7 years ago." The eldest ant stood aside and chuckled, "Don't talk nonsense! You are talking nonsense, Duo's father is not dead!" "Not dead, he wrote me a letter last month." My mother suddenly went crazy and pushed my aunt to the ground. I don't remember what my father looks like, but some people in the village said that my father eloped with a widow from a neighboring village, and some said that my father was in jail. I dare not ask my mother about my father. Every time she mentions my father, she will go crazy and smash things. My cousin stamped his feet. "It's time, this is a fatal matter, everyone tell us what you know." My aunt was tightly grasped by her aunt, lowered her head and said nothing. Lupo sighed and took out 5 bells from her pocket. Divided them to my aunt, cousin, aunt, me and my mother. She whispered, "You go back first. This bell must be carried with you, at least it can keep you safe tonight. If the person who borrowed rice is really the second son, then he must have died in vain. And no one has worshipped him for 7 years, I may not be able to resolve this resentment." Granny Lu looked at my mother with pity. "If you don't tell the truth, no one can save you on the night of the 7th day." The eldest aunt was a little flustered, but still insisted, "We really don't know these." The second son had a big fight with his wife, and I never saw him again. Who knows if he is alive or dead? But the second son's wife always said that the second son wrote back. Granny Lu turned around and asked my mother, "What did you quarrel about?" My mother spoke for a long time, her voice hoarse. "It was raining that day, he was carrying a bucket to catch snails, and I didn't let him go." "Why didn't you let him go?" Granny Lu's voice became softer. "Because that morning, I didn't cook the rice well, and the firewood was very strong. But the rice grains stood in the pot one by one, motionless, just like my mother and my third brother." "Ha! You see, there are only 2 grains of rice in such a big pot, which is not enough to eat." Speaking of this, my mother pushed my aunt to the pond again, "And you go in too." I picked up my aunt who had difficulty walking, and your fat rice grains were delicious. My mother went crazy. When she found that she couldn't move my aunt and the others, she turned around and threw me into the pond. Fortunately, my cousin reacted quickly and reached out to pull me out. "Dua's father, I want to eat fried snail meat with leeks, add more peppers, it's delicious." Don't go, don't go! If the rice is not cooked, there is no way out. Her father, I don't need snails anymore, I don't need it. Mom was tied up in the yard, talking nonsense back and forth. My cousin knelt beside the coffin to burn paper, and my aunt and my younger aunt touched the bell given by Lupo, and I didn't know what they were thinking. I squatted next to my mother with my legs hugged, and my body was wet and smelled of stinky fish. It wasn't until the sound of the rooster crowing that everyone's expression was relieved. According to Lupo's instructions, after breakfast, everyone had to go to the pond to arrange for the body to be retrieved. My aunt asked my younger aunt to cook porridge early, but my younger aunt didn't come out of the kitchen. "Can't you even cook a bowl of porridge? Hurry up, or you won't be able to catch the corpse at noon." The eldest aunt limped towards the kitchen. The youngest aunt stood in front of the stove with a pale face. "Sister-in-law, look at the rice in the pot." I also tiptoed to look into the pot, and instantly understood what my mother said last night. The rice grains stood motionless in the pot, just like a corpse standing in a pond. "Go and call Lupo, go!" The eldest aunt pushed me. "Didn't the second sister-in-law say last night that the rice was not cooked and we couldn't go out?" The youngest aunt stretched out her hand to stop me. The eldest aunt glared at the youngest aunt, then turned her head and looked at me kindly. "Dua, what your mother said was all crazy. Go call Lupo, and I'll give you all the comic books in your cousin's room." Next to the pillar, my mother was also staring at us. Her mouth was wide open, her eyes were dark and glaring, and it was a bit scary. My aunt didn't know what she was thinking of, and she served a bowl of uncooked porridge to my mother. "Second sister-in-law, try it to see if it's cooked." My cousin, who was kneeling and burning paper, also looked over. Under the gaze of several people, my mother threw the bowl of porridge at my uncle's coffin not far away. "Raw rice is for the dead, I won't eat it." My cousin stood up suddenly, because the place where the coffin was hit slowly cracked. Now my aunt was also scared. "Duwazi, go and call Lupo, my mother is still talking nonsense, saying that rice can't be cooked and can't go out." I stood next to my mother with a bell in my hand. "I won't go, my mother won't let me go." Although the temptation of the comic book is great, I believe my mother. And the death of my uncle and my third uncle had a great impact on me, so I didn't dare to go out alone. But during the day, the cracks on my uncle's coffin became bigger and bigger. The eldest aunt stood at the gate of the yard and shouted to my cousin to stay away from the coffin. The sun had not yet risen, and there were a few dim stars hanging in the sky. There was no activity in the village. In the silence, the sound of the coffin cracking was particularly loud. My cousin was standing in front of the coffin in a daze, and he seemed to have not heard the eldest aunt's shouting at all. "Well, I didn't have a good life when you were alive, and you still want to torment my son after you die? Get out!" The eldest aunt was so scared that she got angry and threw the bell in her hand at the coffin, not knowing what she was hitting. "If you have anything, come to me, don't touch my son!" The eldest aunt shouted and cursed as she walked towards the coffin. The bell hit the coffin and a wisp of black smoke came out. It was not until the eldest aunt dragged my cousin to a place far away from the coffin that he suddenly collapsed on the ground and cried loudly. My cousin's face turned pale, as if he had seen something terrible, and it took a long time for him to recover with a long breath. In this way, my aunt squatted at the kitchen door, and my mother and I leaned against the pillar, and no one spoke. I know everyone is waiting for dawn, waiting for Lupo to come. But it was not Lupo who knocked on the door first, but an old man covered in dust. My aunt asked him first, "What's the matter?" But the man went straight to my uncle's coffin and sighed, "I'm still late." Then, the man told me about what happened to my family in the past 6 days. "You are wrong, the body with eyes open in the water needs to be rid of resentment first. Wait until the body closes its eyes before you can fish it out and bury it. This is the first. Second, the bells you 5 people hold are called resentment bells. 5 points form a formation, and the formation becomes evil. Fortunately you only held it for 1 night. If you stay in this coffin for another night, the person inside will turn into evil and no one can save you." The bell of the great aunt fell beside the coffin. She was still hesitating whether to pick it up, but now she was relieved. "I said that Lupo was not good, our family died of death and madness. His third uncle died in front of Lupo, and she couldn't save him. Then the great aunt limped forward again. "Master, what do you think we should do?" The younger sister frowned and said, "Sister-in-law, this person may have heard about our family's affairs and came to deceive people, or Lupo is more trustworthy. I was invited by Qin Shi Shan." The old man said the name of the great uncle, "But the great uncle is dead." The great aunt was stunned for a moment, and then clapped her hands. "I remember that the dead man did say that he would invite another master to come, he was afraid of death." The cousin also came back to his senses. "Is Lupo going to harm us? I just saw my father sitting up in the coffin, so the coffin was cracked by the push." The old man stretched out his hand and motioned us to give him the bell. "Don't worry, it will be fine if the bell is taken away. Your father is not mature yet, I can still save your lives. But your grandma is a little difficult to deal with. The corpse has been exposed, and the resentment is hard to eliminate. It can only be suppressed. You prepare the things that the deceased cannot bear to part with as a medium for suppression." The old man turned to his cousin and said, "Everything is caused by Grandma. It doesn't matter whether the person who borrowed the rice is a human or a ghost. If the 7 grains of rice are human, they will borrow 7 years of life, and if they are ghosts, they will borrow 7 days to return to the world, and they will not bring disaster to future generations. Unless the lifespan of the borrowed person is not enough, even if it is 7 years, it does not take the lifespan of 3 people. So the root cause is that the resentment of the corpse has not been eliminated, which will bring disaster to future generations." The old man's words made my aunt hesitate for a while, and then gave the bell to the old man. I squatted next to my mother, considering whether to give it. My mother had already snatched my bell and then stepped on it hard. "Bad thing, bad, bad!" My aunt panicked, "Master, this..." The old man waved his hand, "It's okay, it will be fine if it is destroyed. Nothing will happen during the day, and the body cannot be retrieved today. You can wait and see what Lupo is going to do. Just cooperate, but don't take the things she gives you." The old man said, "Things are more complicated than he thought, and we need to prepare first, but he will come to watch over us tonight." The aunt saw the old man was leaving. "The rice is not cooked, can we go out?" The old man was stunned for a while, and then followed the aunt into the kitchen to deal with it. The old man took out a wooden stick from the bag on his back and whipped it above the pot. While whipping, he muttered something, and soon, he signaled the aunt to light the fire. Not long after, the rice in the pot began to stick. The old man said, "The rice is not cooked because there is a ghost squatting on the pot. People eat cooked rice, and ghosts eat raw rice. Just drive it away. If you don't drive it away and go out again, the ghost will use it as a substitute, and it is very easy to have an accident." This made the aunt more convinced that the old man was a master. After this, everyone felt a little unnatural when they saw Lupo by the pond. The corpse fisher was burning incense, and Lupo stood aside with a gloomy face. In the daytime, the 2 bodies in the water are more conspicuous and terrifying. Grandma's eyes seemed to be looking at the crowd by the pond. As for the third uncle, who was upside down, everyone could see clearly in the sunlight that his head was standing in a tattered bucket. The younger sister-in-law asked the eldest aunt tremblingly, "Didn't the second sister-in-law say before that the second brother went out to catch snails with a bucket?" The eldest aunt was also scared and turned to the mother whose hands were tied. "Your second sister-in-law is crazy, you are the only one who believes what she says." My mother seemed to see something funny, and she kept giggling and pointed at the third uncle. "What a big snail, Dua's father, you are really capable! We can eat such big snails for a month!" Lupo just glanced at it and didn't say anything. Because the corpse collector had already gone into the water, some brave people in the village also gathered around to watch. Seeing that the corpse attracting incense couldn't be lit again, the crowd began to whisper, "I said that his family was punished. That's right, look at their family, they were originally the poorest family in the village, and they have had such a good life in the past 7 years. The eldest son's family didn't work and ate meat every day. The youngest son was even more idle, but he loved to smoke and drink. He must have done something evil and took other people's money. Now he is dead or crazy, he deserves it. He still wears red and green for his 80th birthday and celebrates it in a grand manner, bah! He can't even close his eyes when he dies." The one who spat was my grandmother's mortal enemy, Old Lady Lee at the entrance of the village. The people around her advised her to stop talking, saying that she is now an evil ghost, and it would be bad if she came to find you. The onlookers said more and more unpleasant things, but we didn't care. Because the corpse retriever, as if seeing something horrifying, hurriedly retreated to the pond. "Lupo, we can't take this job, the money is here, sorry." Lupo looked grim. "If you take this job, you have to retrieve it, this is the rule." It's not that we broke the rules, we have also retrieved this upright corpse, but we dare not touch the corpse covered with snails. Although we are in the business of dead people, there are 3 things we don't touch. Red clothes don't decay, corpses have strange fragrance, and corpses are living things. The snails on the bodies of the mother and child are still moving. We can't touch them. Sorry. The corpse collector and his master kowtowed to the pond together, and then lit incense. They didn't get up and leave until the incense burned out. Lupo said that there was only one chance tomorrow at noon. If no one was willing to come to collect the corpse, only the family could do it. I saw my aunt and aunt looked at each other, as if they agreed that the old man was really good at predicting things. Only I squinted my eyes and looked at the middle of the pond. The familiar smell of stinky fish had slowly spread to the edge of the pond. But no one seemed to smell it, except Lupo, who frowned slightly. "How could there be so many snails? Dua, you said that there were snails in the bucket of the rice borrower. Did you see it?" Lupo looked down at me with a soft look, which made me unconsciously relieved. "No, but I just knew that there were snails in the bucket. Did your grandmother count 7 grains of rice and chase them out?" Lupo seemed to remember something and continued to ask. I thought about it carefully, but I only remembered the back of my grandmother chasing after me with rice in her arms. It was all a disaster, and your family can't escape it. Dua, you stay with your mother tonight, don't answer whoever calls you, and don't leave your bell. I wanted to tell Lupo that my bell was broken, but my aunt kept answering and then pulled me over. My uncle's coffin was still in the yard. There was only somewhat mud left in my grandmother's coffin. My aunt suggested that we all sleep on the floor in the living room, so that we can live together safely. My aunt was looking forward to someone coming to protect her. The old man didn't show up until I fell asleep while watching my mother. In my dream, I felt something dripping on my face. I reached out and wiped it, and the strong smell of stinky fish hit me, and I woke up at once. There was a bell between my mother's tied hands, just pressing on my chest. My aunt had fallen asleep leaning against the chair, and my aunt was lying opposite her. My cousin was lying on the mat and snoring, and everything seemed normal. The stinky fish smell was still in my nose, and the dampness of my fingertips reminded me that the feeling just now was not a dream. I looked around again and realized that the smell came from my aunt, who was sleeping on her side. Before I got up, my aunt suddenly woke up, followed by a shrill scream. My aunt pointed to my aunt with a shaking finger. "Big, sister-in-law, ghost." My mother was also woken up, and she laughed at my aunt. "The fried snails are on the table, ha ha ha! Dua, go eat!" I stood up and saw my aunt lying on her side, her face covered with snails. My cousin cried and laughed, and yelled to the yard, "Come out if you can, come to me!" My aunt fell off the chair and rolled and crawled out the door. The old man came in from outside the yard at this time, changed his clothes, and looked a bit like a hermit. "Didn't you say you would watch over us tonight?" "Huh? My mother is dead, dead!" My cousin was very excited and grabbed the old man's clothes. "I went to the pond to suppress the corpse, and your grandmother and third uncle did not leave the pond. I came from that side and found snails and silt all the way." The old man went into the house to check on the miserable condition of my aunt, and then turned to look at me. "The bell leads the way, whose bell is still there?" I subconsciously blocked in front of my mother, mine was stepped on. The old man frowned and looked at me, then said to my cousin, "There is another body in the pond, it has become a resentful corpse, and it is also from your family." My cousin's face changed for a while, and then he pulled my aunt over. "Aunt, now some are dead and some are crazy, you tell me everything you know, otherwise no one will survive." My aunt didn't dare to go in, she just stood at the door and stammered about what happened 7 years ago. She said that the body in the pond should be my father's. Everyone thought that the second brother had a quarrel with the second sister-in-law and ran away from home, or got into trouble outside and was arrested and imprisoned. He has been in trouble since he was a child, but I saw it 7 years ago. When I got up at night, I saw my eldest brother and third brother chopping meat in the yard. They threw the minced meat into a bucket and took it to feed the fish. After they left, I picked up a finger on the ground. My aunt said that she heard my uncle and third uncle talking about my father that day. They said that my father was too stubborn and didn't know how to adapt. The eldest brother said that otherwise he wouldn't have to kill the second brother and make my mother sad. My aunt lowered her head and finished speaking softly. My dad was killed by my uncle and my third uncle. Why? What about Grandma? Does Grandma know? I stood up and asked my aunt. My aunt shook her head. I don't know either. I just heard a little bit. My sister-in-law and the others must know the situation. The old man sighed. If it was 7 years ago, then I would probably know. 7 years ago, Qin Qishan found me and said that his brother died unexpectedly. He was afraid that the old people at home would be sad, so he asked me for a way to cover up his whereabouts, so that the old people at home would think that the brother was just away from home. No wonder my mother has been looking for Lupo to find people every 3 or 5 days in recent years, but she can never find my father's whereabouts. It turned out to be used to cover up the traces of murder. No wonder the hexagram led me here, it's my karma. The old man beat his chest, seeming to regret it. The old man said that he was not sure whether it was Grandma or my dad who killed my uncle and my third uncle before, but the 2 standing corpses that came in tonight were definitely not those 2 standing corpses. I will check under the standing corpses in the pond during the day. If Qin Qishan had suppressed his brothers according to the method I gave him before, he probably didn't clean up the bodies. The heavy rain a few days ago, coupled with the fact that it was the 7th year, broke the resentment and was able to go ashore and cause chaos. I listened blankly to the old man and my cousin talking about what to prepare for tomorrow, but I thought in my heart, is it my father who borrowed rice? Why didn't he come to see me after being alive for 7 days? I sat there thinking about it until dawn, but my mother didn't smile foolishly and slept soundly. Today is the 7th day since Grandma passed away, and it is also the last day that Lupo said. If we can't bury her, we will have no way to survive. Early in the morning, the old man brought the things prepared by his cousin to the pond and ran into Lupo. If you don't believe me, an old woman, you can just say it directly, there is no need to find another idiot. The old man smiled. Old sister, let's not beat around the bush. You have dragged the corpse collection to the 7th day. The Qin family is almost dead. What are your plans? Lupo snorted coldly and did not answer. The old man did not wait for the answer. After asking, he went directly into the water and walked towards the upright corpse. He walked directly to Grandma's side before stopping. I saw him stretch out his right hand, slowly turn the bucket under the head of the third uncle, and gently push it. In the turbid water surface, he directly reached out and clamped it, and actually lifted the bucket out of the water. The old man ignored the upright corpse and only took the bucket back to the pond. Look, is this your father's thing? The old man threw the bucket at my feet. But I didn't know it at all. Yes, this is the second brother's bucket. There is a hole on the side, and he always takes this bucket to catch snails. After the aunt looked around, she said softly. The body is gone, and the obsession is so strong. It's a wonder that he can gather together through snails. After the old man finished speaking, he looked at Lupo again. You must have calculated that the second son of the Qin family was in this pond a long time ago, right? Lupo sneered, why are you pretending to be a good person? Didn't you teach the elder Qin the method of cutting up the body and feeding the fish? But you forgot to say that the obsession also needs to be dealt with, and it caused this disaster. The cousin stepped forward. No matter what the previous cause was, it's hard for you two to join forces to help deal with the family's funeral. The old man turned around and glanced at my mother. This matter is not something that this resentful corpse can do. There are still people who want you dead. The aunt's face turned pale. The second brother won't look for me if he wants revenge? I don't know. Cause and effect are in order, the hatred has been settled, don't hurt people anymore. The old man took out the bell that Lupo gave to my aunt and the others. You use the bell to kill the resentful bell, and you also use this bell to lead the resentful corpse. I am afraid it is for the property of the Qin family? I was stunned. What property does our family have? As far as I can remember, I have lived a very hard life. I can only eat meat dishes occasionally when I go to my grandmother's house. Property? Ha tilde. If I want money, I have other ways. Don't think about burying the standing corpse today. I want all the Qin family members to die. Lupo is no longer kind, and her crazy look makes me a little scared. People have died in our family one after another. Today, no one dares to come and watch the corpse recovery. In the noisy cicadas, only the rapid breathing of a few of us is left. My aunt was furious and asked, "Lupo, you have no grudges with our Qin family. In the past few years since you moved to the village, my mother often invited you to dinner. How can you repay kindness with enmity? Well, you might as well go to the underworld and ask your good brothers. Was it one person or two people who were chopped up 7 years ago? Granny Lu said that her son went out 7 years ago and never came back, and all his property was lost. You, old man, are not a good person. It is you who covets the Qin family's finances, right? Some of them are dead, some are crazy. If you cheat more, you can live a rich life, right?" Granny Lu pointed at the black dog blood in the old man's hand. "You just want to suppress it temporarily, get the property and run away. This standing corpse is obviously obsessed, and the second son of the Qin family is the obsession of the standing corpse." The old man didn't say anything, just threw the bucket into the pond casually, and the bucket seemed to have life and floated straight towards Grandma's body. "You also saw that this old woman didn't want you to live, and now only I can save you." The old man poured the black dog blood in his hand on the headscarf that Grandma often used, and then looked at his cousin. "I can let your family rest in peace, but everything your father had must be given to me." The cousin took 2 deep breaths. "I don't know where he hid it, you can search at will, and it's yours if you find it." The old man smiled, went into the water again and tied the headscarf over Grandma's eyes. Then he chanted something to Grandma and Uncle's bodies, and then he gently pulled, and the 2 bodies slowly lay flat on the water. The old man turned around and walked to the pond, and the bodies in the bucket followed him back. Seeing this, Lupo sneered and turned to leave. My aunt wanted to stop her. "You killed so many people in our family, you can't just let it go." I didn't do anything. It was your second brother who borrowed rice. It was also him who killed people for revenge. I just didn't have enough ability to stop the resentful corpses from doing evil." When Lupo left, she looked at me with some meaningful eyes. I looked at my mother beside me. I was a little scared. She reached out and took my hand, and patted my hand gently as usual. The old man successfully buried the body, and there were 5 coffins in the yard. The bucket was placed in the coffin that belonged to my father, and the bucket was full of snails. My cousin was burning paper money numbly, and my aunt followed the old man to search around the house. Finally, I found a few vases and plates under my grandmother's bed. The old man's eyes lit up, and after putting the things away, he neatly set up the table in front of the coffin. This time, from carrying the coffin to burying it, no forks were used. My cousin and aunt knelt in front of the grave and finally breathed a sigh of relief. "It's finally over, nothing will happen in the future, right?" The old man said, "It's okay, your second brother has long been dead, we bury the bucket and snails he was obsessed with, and your mother's obsession is your second brother. As for the others, it's karma, and they've all been dealt with. As for the son that the old woman said, there is no corpse, I have also suppressed it again. I'll keep watch tonight, don't worry. Although the old man said so, I know something will happen tonight. I always knew that the person who borrowed rice was my father, and the murderer was also. That day, I saw that face covered with snails, but I just knew he was my father. Later, he secretly came to see my mother, and I knew it all. He is so stupid that he can't hide his stinky fish smell every time. When my uncle died, my dad was trying to wipe the mud under his feet, but the more he wiped, the more mud he had. When my third uncle walked towards my grandmother's body, it was my dad who asked him to touch the snails. So I knew it was my dad who killed the man, but I didn't want to tell them. I don't believe what Lupo and the old man said. My dad's obsession is not the bucket or the snails, but my mom. Just like now, even though the old man has finished dealing with it, I know my dad is still there. Even though I can't see it, the stinky fish smell in my bones has been around my mom. I don't know who my dad will take away tonight, Maybe he just took the last chance to see my mom. Lupo came to me in the evening, your dad borrowed the lifespan, and he will disappear after tonight unless he borrows the lifespan again. Lupo said that she taught my dad to use snails to shape his body. My son is not a good person either. He also stole the money. But your uncle and his family shouldn't have left me with no thoughts. Lupo's son was chopped up and fed to fish, and his clothes were pressed into the mud of the pond. The water washed away, leaving no trace, and there was no chance to reshape his body and save his life. The smell of rotten fish slowly spread, and I knew that my father had heard what Lupo said. Lupo left, and she said that her great revenge had been avenged. Next, I will go wherever I go and live wherever I want. Dua, remember that people are more terrifying than ghosts. I hope my father can lend me rice again, but who will lend it to him? It was getting dark, and the yard was filled with the smell of rotten fish, but it seemed that only I could smell it. The gate of the yard slowly opened, and my mother, who was squatting by the wall, stood up suddenly. But there was nothing outside the door, and my mother suddenly cried. "Why are you so stupid? You can lend it to me, I will lend it to you!" The smell of rotten fish in the air gradually faded until it disappeared, and I understood that my father was gone. My cousin didn't say anything, but my aunt seemed to be frightened by something and fainted. The old man never showed up, so I helped my cousin carry my aunt to the bed, and we stayed up until dawn. My aunt went crazy, "Go away, go away! You are covered with snails! Don't touch me!" I guess she saw my dad. The old man never showed up, and the vases and other things that had been packed were gone. My cousin was so angry that he cursed, but fortunately nothing strange happened afterwards. My aunt was sometimes sober and sometimes crazy. My mother miraculously recovered her consciousness, and she wanted to take me away from here. Before leaving, I found my cousin, who said he would take good care of my aunt in the future. Second mother, let's end the hatred of the previous generation, and don't come back again. Let me guard this place and atone for my dad's sins. I heard from my cousin again 10 years later. He sent a large sum of money to my mother. He said that the village was repairing the road, and when he moved the grave, he found the bones and the vases and porcelain that the old man took away in my dad's coffin. We haven't mentioned the things in Chintang village in these years. Sometimes I wonder if those ghost stories in my childhood were nightmares I had, and I woke up and took them as real things and sealed them in my memory. My mother looked at the news about my cousin and sighed softly. "Dua, are you afraid of that?" It took me a while to react. Mom was talking about my dad's appearance covered with snails. "No, people are much scarier than ghosts." I repeated what Lupo said when she left. I actually look forward to your dad coming back suddenly one day, so when Lupo told me that your dad was dead and it was a sibling cause and effect, I wanted to kill your uncle with my own hands. But I didn't dare to do it easily. I'm not afraid of death, I can't leave you. I have doubted it over the years, but I always have a fluke. The first time my mother told me this, her eyes were red again when she mentioned my dad. Lupo told me that she could help me get revenge, but if your dad lost his mind, he might kill us together. At that time, I thought, your dad would not do that. Even if he becomes a resentful corpse, he will definitely recognize us. Mom smiled gently, reached out and patted me. "From now on, we two will carry on your father's life and live well." The end.